The Peasants Revolt of 1381, England's first revolution. So in the summer of 1381, thousands of ordinary people rose up against the English government. It was one of the first major rebellions in English history, and it shook the country to its core. The roots of the revolt stretch way back to the Black Death. Between 1348 and 1350, the plague had killed over a third of England's population. With so many dead, surviving peasants were in high demand. They wanted higher wages, better working conditions, and freedom from serfdom, a system of work service where they were tied to their lord's land. So a peasant's life was highly restricted. They could not leave the land without the lord's permission. They needed permission to get married. They were charged to use the mill, and they had to do several days' work service looking after the lord's land. However, King Edward III and his government didn't agree with the changes brought about by the Black Death. They passed the Statute of Labourers, making it illegal for peasants to ask for higher pay. They also wanted to make work service compulsory, and that wasn't the end of the peasants' problems. There was tax. To pay for the Hundred Years' War, King Richard II's government introduced poll taxes. Everyone had to pay, rich or poor, and the third poll tax in 1381 was a step too far for many people. So what does a timeline of revolt look like? Well, in Essex and Kent, people refused to pay. Three of the king's tax collectors were actually killed, and villagers armed themselves and marched towards London demanding change. Two leaders rose to the front. There was John Ball, a radical priest who preached equality, and there was Wat Tyler, a former soldier. They wanted an end to serfdom, lower taxes, fair treatment for all. As the rebels stormed into London, they destroyed buildings linked to the rich and powerful, including the Savoy Palace, home of the hated noble John of Gaunt, and they executed officials and demanded to speak to the young King Richard II, who was only 14 years old. So King Richard bravely agreed to meet the rebels at Mile End, and he promised to end serfdom, pardon the rebels, and listen to their demands. It seemed as if they'd got what they wanted. Some rebels began to return home. They trusted the king. However, the next day at Smithfield, things began to go wrong. During talks with the king, Wat Tyler was killed by the Lord Mayor of London. Chaos followed, but Richard calmed the rebels, telling them, "You shall have no captain but me." Once the danger had passed, the king went back on his promises, though. The rebels were hunted down, John Ball and others were executed, serfdom wasn't abolished. But in the long term, the revolt was not forgotten. Over time, landowners realised they could no longer treat peasants as they once had. They could earn higher wages, and restrictions were reduced. The poll tax was eventually scrapped, and within the next century, serfdom in England had faded away. Many thanks for watching. Please think about liking and subscribing.